hosted by My Vote Counts and Chisimani Center for Activist Education. Through the series, engaging with community activists, with researchers, with academics, it's clear that local government is in an unprecedented crisis. Beyond the damning AG's report published last year that shows the inability of municipalities to manage their finances, the high levels of irregular spending, there's an obvious collapse of basic services. There's poor policy implementation, and we've seen, importantly, local government just doesn't listen to their constituencies, and it's not representative of them either. And we've also seen in the last 2 webinars that when municipalities fail, services to people who need it are not delivered, local economies collapse, unemployment increases, and livelihoods are disrupted. And last week, we spoke to community activists and movements about their expectations for the local government elections and how they are planning to use their vote in the context of this crisis. And there were many propositions that were put forward, from putting up independent candidates to outright rejecting the electoral process, and calls for what some activists call democracy from below. Today, we'll look at that. We'll look at what the alternatives are, if there are any. And to help us unpack this, we have Professor Stephen Friedman from UJ, who has written extensively on democracy, and Dr. Musa Padi, who has written on failing municipalities and local politics. Prof. Stephen, I'll start with you. As an introduction, I'll give you about 5 minutes. Maybe you can tell us, why is local government failing?
Well, thanks for the invitation. I think it's very important to stress that local government is only failing for some people. It's not failing for other people, contrary to what you might read in the media. If you live in the suburbs of the major cities in this country, you're still doing rather well. And I think that one has to be cautious, for example. I mean, I know you had a discussion on it earlier of the fuss which is made in the media of the Auditor General's report. The Auditor General's report is actually about whether you meet a set of bureaucratic criteria, which are extremely controversial. I mean, I was speaking to somebody in the Treasury for some research I was doing a while ago, who said that what the rules make it easier to buy a motor car than to buy a book, because there are all sorts of steps you have to go through, etc. So I don't think that's a particularly good guide. I think the guide is far more about the way in which municipalities are affecting the lives of citizens. And despite a great deal of complaining in the suburbs generally, municipalities aren't doing that badly. In the places where the majority of South Africans live, they're doing terribly, as your series has reflected. And I don't think this tells us so much about local government as it tells us about the society in which we live, because I think it's a symptom of the society in which we live. We live in a highly unequal society, which still has not broken from the fundamental patterns that existed before 1994. And what strikes me, and I've just published a book about this, is that if you look at the contrast between suburban life and township life today, 27 years into democracy, it's not entirely different to the way it was before 1994. In the suburbs, people not only have better services, they have a voice. If you're a suburbanite, you can pick up the phone and yell at the municipality, and they do with great regularity. In the townships, if you happen to have access to a phone which you can afford to use, the municipality is probably not going to listen to you very much anyway. So I think it's a crisis it's a crisis of inequality, which I think is the fundamental issue in our cities today. And I think that it is also a crisis of representation, by which I mean that the majority of people just aren't listened to. We have constant evidence throughout the country that local government just doesn't listen to people. And that in turn is also a symptom of the society, because I've often argued that you don't understand local government in this country unless you realize that in many parts of the country, the difference between being a councillor and losing your seat is the difference between being middle class and poor. And a person in that position who is in the council seat because they want to be middle class rather than poor is not going to spend an awful amount of time worrying about whether they're actually reflecting what people living in township houses and shacks want. They're going to spend a lot of time reflecting on whether they're doing what the people who are likely to put them on the list for the next election want. So that, you find consistently when people go out into the streets in townships and shack settlements, that the mayor or the councillor is a target, because people feel very often, for the reasons I've explained entirely appropriately, that the municipal councillors are interested in themselves, but they're not all that interested in the people they represent. But of course, that crisis of representation is not just something we see at local government. It's something we see in all spheres of government in this country. So there are certain problems, I guess, which are more obvious in local government, simply because there are hundreds of local governments rather than hundreds of national governments and provinces. And very often it means that you have a government for people in a very under-resourced area, in which there are the kind of power relations which just don't make for representative government. And therefore, in local government, it's far more obvious. And of course, very often that translates, as your series has been showing, into very real negative impacts on people's lives. But I think we need to, but my point is we need to see local government as a symptom of South Africa in 2021, rather than the cause of a lot of the ills we see in our cities.
Musa, why is local government failing?
I think just adding to Stephen's point in terms of, I think one of the things that, because I worked in local government and local municipalities at the very rural areas, the Bantustans, the former Bantustans per se, particularly in Limpopo, where we, for a couple of years, we were there literally, and seeing and following and shadowing these officials and trying to understand what is actually going on in these former Leboa in particular. I think to start, as Stephen has said, the local reflects the crisis at the national level. So there's an issue around thinking through that local government is a reflection of the crisis. It's not a parochial thing that exists outside what is happening at national level. That's a fact. But the second thing I want to say is, I think also we need to historicize part of these municipalities, because different municipalities have different histories as well. And actually how it affects different areas is quite important, especially when you think about the issues around also the Bantustans and also that configuration and what it meant for rural or semi-urban areas. It's very different from what we often refer to, which is the Johannesburg areas and the township in an urban areas in various ways. And I think the configuration, again, of the amalgamation of the whole Bantustans, the Black local authorities, and that process, when actually amalgamated, spilled out various things. I mean, earlier on, from an earlier stage of the union, already there was like issues around the government was governing for sort of areas, provincial areas. Then there was a local white only reserves and white or farmed only in the 1970s when the reforms, because this is like unfinished as the racialized component is trying to reform itself as people actually move. Also, new institutions at the very local were formed in order to reform certain stuff. The Bantustans in the 1960s, which came with the Bantu councils or the Black councils later on, both within those areas and also in the urban areas. And then all of these things amalgamated in the late 80s with Botha trying to reform because of the insurgent and trying to actually pull the apartheid system together and found some reforms. And when you start actually looking at the historical element, you start seeing that you cannot understand some of the configurations and the crises that includes the political configurations of actually what has happened, the administrative backlog that has happened throughout these different epochs of history, and then also the services that actually they had to actually deal with, and how they actually, after 1994, they formed a unified thing that actually spilled out different crises, the fiscal crisis, the political administrative interface that actually we still find ourselves, i.e. the ANC, but also services, basic services. What does the municipality do, really? I mean, that's what basic services do they do? Most of these municipalities, at best, they don't supply housing, they don't supply clinics, they don't even do maintenance in some roads, because some roads in some municipalities are not even owned by the municipalities themselves. There are actually municipalities without land and so on. Or by and large, with amalgamation in rural areas, most of the municipalities, they're actually serving indigent population, i.e. rates and taxes are still really, by and large, still paid by specific white only or needy towns at some point, because I worked in those areas where at some point they were called white needy towns, where there's still the rates and services of those who pay those municipalities. So you're actually speaking about municipalities that can't even sustain themselves, with the idea that they should be sustaining themselves, in large, and also where these cultures also come in with different cultures. In Leboa, for example, the Pedi culture was very dominant versus the Ndebele. So there's also these dynamics of ethnicity that actually also plays out within the municipalities that actually institutionally they cannot hold themselves outside during the service delivery issues. So even looking at, have they forgotten the people? Of course, but if you're gonna look at corruption only as like these officials who are self-enriching themselves, which is partly true, and the crisis of funding and so on of the ANC, which actually relies on these tenders in order to do party funding in itself, which is also true. But there are also other dynamics, institutional dynamics that actually happens within the municipalities. And there are also historical that actually came together, and it's a melting pot within that municipalities that we also need to think about as we think about these ideas of corruption, patrimony and state capture. They're not servicing us, that are actually not easy answers as well in that process. I mean, there are municipalities where, by and large, they've been owned by and controlled historically by either ESCOM or SASOL or so on. They don't have the autonomy to even govern themselves. What do we do with those municipalities, for example, that are actually, by and large, even planning of the town in itself is still, by and large, actually influenced by external actors like Exxaro in some cases, and also mining actually plays a fundamental role in that processes, that actually even that development or the economy is still controlled by other factors, and which the municipalities only adapt what is imposed on them rather than the other way around. And these are historical issues as well that we also have to think about, in addition to what Stephen has spoken about, that we have to be cautious about as well. So I just want to, leave it there.
Musa, I'm going to come back to you. Just as a note, I'm looking at the attendee list, and we do have some comrades from the rural areas that you're referring to, and from mining affected areas. Maybe and comrades, I see you there. If you have any questions, ask in the chat box at any point, and we'll try and address them. But maybe you can tell us, in your research, how do communities in these areas relate to and understand local politics and local democracy?
I mean, by and large, for example, I worked in Lephalale and Mogalakwena, and I mean, Mogalakwena was like, which is a platinum mining area now on like primarily the biggest mining companies there is from the Canadians. They own the majority. Anglo American is also there. I think it's the only mine that Anglo American didn't sell in various, because they're selling all their mines except that one because of the platinum in that area. So it's quite wealthy in that area as well. But I think one of the things that we have to, I think a starting point is that we inherited like fragile institutions. That's important. And I think over the years, they became really like a perpetual crisis and perpetual instability in various ways. And the key challenges, people do want water. I mean, water has been a big issue in Limpopo for various ways. There's supposed to be pipe lines that actually have to be implemented where people have done the articulation. However, the water, and because of the Department of Water at that time, ruled by Nomvula, didn't actually do what it promised through digitizing the Crocodile River to go to Limpopo in various ways. So some of the so-called mines, actually, where they got the mining licenses, cannot even start. And that's another question, again, we have to think about. They can't even start the mining because of these issues. People do not have water, are still waiting for water. By and large, in a very hot way, they're facing droughts. Some of the people cannot actually farm or do anything. I mean, you drive around, there was a time when we were driving around in Limpopo where you feel like the donkeys and so on were dying because there was no water in particular areas. I mean, we have to talk about the drought problems that we are facing as a country outside, but also in these areas where the Padale by and large has become like a search for these coal. I mean, the Department of Mineral Resources has given so many licenses to that area, to the point where certain areas where housing is supposed to be built, they cannot build it because it's too close to a mine that is going to be built at that area, that they cannot actually have housing in that. And also the Padale doesn't have land. So to even acquire land for housing for people, for example, they had to go through the whole Department of Housing, the Department of Land to actually buy that land from some farm owner and so on to get that land. And then eventually when they do get that land, they can't build there because the Department of Mineral Resources have given licenses to some business people who needs to build a power station there, a private power station. So these are the things that actually people, never mind around unemployment, around also spatial, apartheid spatial, segregation that is happening, where from town, I mean, I'm using town in terms of like the old apartheid sense versus the rural areas to get to town, and otherwise it's still 40, 50, 60 kilometers away, even in itself, to access malls and so on. So you're talking about in that level. But what does it mean in terms of the municipalities as well, inside the municipalities? For example, I mean, where now by and large, because of these Auditor General, because of the National Treasury, because of Coxta, whatever these institutions where by and large officials are worried more about compliance than actually serving the people. This is one of the things where 90% of actually what people do in the officials is about actually reporting to these different stakeholders in order to show that they're complying with the law, which is also actually a huge burden on that. Number two, there is also a huge internal battles within the ANC, from a regional level to the provincial level, especially if there are too many factions that actually penetrate into the municipality. And how do they penetrate into the municipality? The issues about lawfare. The foot soldiers of the struggle of the so-called state capture is the lawyers, because each faction within the municipality is trying as much as it can to legitimize their side and why they actually subverted the law the way they did. So you find municipalities, there's a huge bill of legal fees because everybody wants a legal opinion on the decision that was made. Everybody wants to go to court for other decision or appointment of someone who, the Section 56, officials and so on. there's auditors. I mean, the complexities of like these auditing reports from these auditing firms are very complicit and are part of the problem as well. Everybody wants an auditing report, and auditors have to come commissioned. This faction of will commission KPMG, the other factional will commission, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and everybody is complicit with these audit reports that actually have come to play a political and dysfunctional role within the municipalities. Then there's a huge issues around, in that climate already, there's issues around security, huge. If you look at some of the numbers in terms of where the municipalities' money goes into, security. Somebody has a bodyguard there, because it comes with also assassinations that comes with it. Then people get paranoid. People wanna, especially at high level officials within the municipalities, part of it is using those securities as part of protecting themselves and struggling in that. Then comes the community protesting for service delivery. Some of the protests, funny enough, even though it comes from outside, some of it is actually sanctioned from inside by the officials actually sanctioning, and councillors sanctioning from the inside the municipality to actually subvert certain decisions. So also there's some of the ways we actually instead have to think about protest in a more nuanced ways. It's not easy, the community is struggling and therefore they're fighting. Some of it is very complicated, that it actually comes from both within and outside the municipality as well, that we have to think about. And then we have to think about, some cases, not all. It's happening in the Free State, it's happening in Limpopo and some things. The role of taxi owners, actually, how they play this game as well. Some of them are hired as security guards. Some of them are used in these protests to actually become sort of like the ones who shut down the town. When the taxis are at war, the town shuts down, no businesses actually operates, the police get deployed as part of also embedded in these factional politics of the ANC, and also affects the local governance in itself. So these are very complex issues. And all of these things, the point is, all of these things, the money that is allocated to the municipalities to do service delivery, most of it doesn't go to service delivery because of these dysfunctionality or institutional damage has happened that goes everywhere else except maintaining that road, because tenders are actually contested. And there's already a rule within the ANC municipalities, I don't know elsewhere, where certain tenders are given to the local people, the provincial and the national people, and it's divided already. It's an open secret, but it's there as well. So we also have to think about these questions. And also on top of it is because of funding. How do you pay office barriers of the ANC in a small thing? Tenders are part of that as well, because you have to give 10% there, 10% there within your tenders as well. Immediately when you actually finish giving and allocating that tender money elsewhere, and your responsibility is all gone, and you have to build a house, you have to maintain a road. So those are difficult questions that we also have to deal with.
Okay, thanks, Musa. I want to unpack these questions a bit more later. Masha and Caroline will get to your questions as well. Stephen, if you follow the coverage of the local government elections, which is in like 2 weeks' time, you see many journalists are going into communities, working class communities, township areas, etc. And the focus is always about what are the very basic problems that people are facing. So SABC will go into Soweto, for example, and the focus will be about electricity and the fact that there's no electricity. Or in Mitchell's Plain, and the focus will be about the fact that there's no water. There are water issues. Or in Tembisa, and the focus will be about the housing crisis there, and the fact that people don't have houses. Stephen, you spoke about the crisis of representation. Is this issue of basic services and basic problems, the focus on that, is that all that local government and local democracy is about?
No, it isn't all that local government and local democracy is about. Look, I mean, I've noticed the same thing as you do, and I have such, I mean, on one, I have kind of mixed feelings about what we're getting from the media at the moment, because on the one hand, there was a time when they just didn't bother what people in those circumstances thought at all. So you just interview the politicians. Now they've got the message that actually there are a whole lot of lives out there that you have to take account of. And that's obviously a step forward. But then, as you say, it just gets reduced to this kind of thing in which you put a camera in front of somebody and they describe a set of problems, and then somehow you've done your duty and you've described what's going on in those areas. I mean, that's the beginning of the description. It's not the end of the description. And there's so many questions you could ask people. And there's so many issues you could raise with people, which would actually, it also sort of sends a particular message about what the average person living in poverty is. This is a person who is a victim. It's a person whose role is reduced to complaining about victimhood and saying somebody else ought to do something about it. And what we really need is, and that gets to the heart of your question, is an understanding that those people who are in front of the cameras and the people who are living in those circumstances are human beings with a perspective, with a contribution to make, with ideas on how they would like their areas to be governed, and how they would like their needs to be met, which we just don't pick up. And so that it reduces local, it's this question of service delivery, which I've been very critical of. You reduce local government to a process in which a bunch of technical people decide what is good for people and provide it for them. And then the role of the people is to decide whether they like it or not. I mean, that's not local democracy. That's not, what democracy is supposed to be, which is power for everybody. That's power for a bunch of technicians, and I'm afraid that this type of journalism feeds into that. And I'm not minimizing the constraints. I mean, Moses described, I think, very importantly and in a great texture, just how many obstacles there are to local democracy. But that doesn't mean that we should give up on local democracy and just reduce it to what the media have tended to reduce it to. I mean, ultimately, local democracy should be about an environment in which people can govern their own areas. And we don't have anything approaching that. And service delivery makes that entirely impossible, because service delivery is what a group of technicians decide is good for people. To me, democracy is where people decide what is good for themselves. And then the technicians can come in and help people to realize those needs. I think it also neglects, when Musa was talking about the way the elites operate, and I think that's a very accurate description of the way in which the elites operate. I think we need to understand a bit more about how the people who are outside the elites operate. I was fortunate enough because we're both academics. I had to supervise a doctorate a while ago on the dynamics in a particular area of Mpumalanga. And what struck me about that is that the person who wrote it, who of course got her doctorate, describes there's a man, and if I can bore people with stuff for a moment, there's a man called James Scott who wrote a very famous book called Weapons of the Weak, based on his observations in Malaysia. And essentially what Scott describes is the way in which people who haven't got power respond in these situations. And what this particular doctorate did was have a look at how the people in that particular area responded. In a sense, it's the opposite. And what people are doing, one understands, is entirely necessary for for their survival. But it's the opposite of local democracy, because what people are doing is coming up with strategies which means that those who have power will harm them as little as possible. In other words, you make sure that you're going to, as little damage is done to you as possible by the power holders. And of course, what really should be happening is that people should be exercising power themselves. So when I hear that there are service delivery protests, what I think is going on, I mean, obviously in different areas, people are protesting about different things. And of course, as Mosa quite correctly says, sometimes the protests are organized by the people who are allegedly being protested against. But I always remind people when I point that out, that the fact that these protests are very often organized by local elites doesn't mean that the people who are protesting don't have real grievances. Of course they have real grievances. It's just unfortunately the elites are very often the only people who have the capacity. So in a sense, what local democracy should be about is about those people who appear in front of the camera as victims, becoming active citizens who are able to shape their own local worlds, their own local realities. We're a very long way from that. And what worries me about the kind of media coverage you're talking about and the way we tend to talk about this is that as long as we talk about it in this way, we don't even set this up as something which ought to happen. The whole point about the service delivery thing is that what ought to happen is that we need far more people with technical qualifications to come in and sort it out. Now, I don't think that's what we need. I think very often people are fleeing those people. Just one example out of hundreds, there's an area in the greater Johannesburg area called Diepsloot, which is a shack settlement. And there were major upheavals in Diepsloot, where people were in fact rebelling against the technicians because the technicians were saying that service delivery dictated that a whole lot of people in Diepsloot were living in the wrong place. So you come along to a bunch of people and say, our technical models tell you you've got to go and live somewhere else. And obviously people find that unacceptable. They're quite right, it is unacceptable. So that's an example of where that kind of approach leads us. It leads us to a situation in which local government is about how people who've been to the right universities and technicons can decide what's good for us. And that's not, in my view, what it's about at all. It's given the constraints that people face, it's very difficult for people to start becoming local citizens. And that reminds me of just saying one more thing. One of my, besides Scott and his weapons of the week, somebody else who has any about this is an Indian social thinker called Partha Chatterjee. And Chatterjee writes in one of his books, and I'm sure that's a reality throughout South Africa, is that in India, a lot of people in Indian slums are, he says, in a totally contradictory position. What is the contradictory position? According to the Indian constitution, these are people with rights, and they are citizens with rights which must be respected. In the minds of the local municipality, they are planning problems because they live in the wrong place. And what Chatterjee argues is that bringing democracy to Indian slums, and it's the same, I think, in Johannesburg and every other place in South Africa, is how do we enable planning problems to turn themselves into citizens? In other words, how do those people who regard it as a planning problem become people who actually decide what the plans are going to be?
Thanks, Stephen. Before we go deeper into these questions, I want to address some of the questions that people have asked in the Q&A box as well as the chat box. Musa, maybe you can take some of these. Masha is an activist based in Marikana. He asked, what's the role of councillors in mining communities? Franchina is an activist based in Lephalale. She asked, how can we hold municipalities accountable? And then Mandisa asked, what is the importance of the provision of basic services and social grants in deciding the political leadership of municipality in township and rural areas?
Sorry, the last question, sorry.
What's the importance of the provision of basic services and social grants in deciding the political leadership of a municipality in a township and rural area?
Okay.
You can also see it, Musa, if you open the Q&A box.
Okay. You know, and I just want to add to what Stephen, to answer some of the questions. The integrated development plan is not participatory democracy. And I think the mistake that people have made is to go, again, as you said, the technocrats, to go into these communities and say, what do you want? Which is actually, is not making a decision. By stating that I want a road there, I want houses there, it's not actually a democratic process of actually making decisions in various ways. And I think we have to start thinking, and I think it's across, if we're going to be radical about democracy, it's across. We need to know, even our military plans for, if we're going to be serious about actually having a free, democratic, and becoming participatory citizens and actually making decisions from all levels of the state. I think that's important, and not these tick boxing frameworks that are given to the people. And I think, in the municipality, the role of so there's council meetings. Everybody is invited to council meetings. Anybody can go to council meetings, actually, as you're right, as living in these communities. So basically, with the council meeting, there's the executive, the mayor, the councillors. Then is this what we call the Section 56. So the Section 56 managers are the technocrats. They present they need, sustainability reports, which is another issue around those things. Sustainability reports, these are the community's request. These are the tenders that we need to decide on. These are the matters that they need to decide on. And the council is supposed to say yes or no in that superficial level. This is not what's happening, but from a very classic, municipality act sort of process, this is where things are supposed to happen. The council is supposed to approve all the plans that these executives are planning to implement. So they're the decision makers in that process. They're supposed to be closer to the community to add more things to the community and then tell the executives to implement it to the ground level. Doesn't happen in that way. By and large, most of the councillors also have to vote on certain matters, what goes in, what it is, appointing the officials. The municipal mayors, the municipal managers, always a contested position in the municipality because certain factions want their own manager, the other people want their own managers. So by and large, the councillor's role is an oversight and also decision-making process to the implementation of the thing. Doesn't happen at all. And also part of the problem why it doesn't happen as well is that actually there isn't participatory democracy. Some of the most, who decides on whether something has to be commissioned or not? The community is never there to decide on these things. To what extent actually to debate certain matters? The community is never there to actually make those things to actually happen. By and large, these things are actually driven by factional politics within the ANC and also within different parties as well, depending also who actually is more in control and so on. So even the decisions to actually build, water pipes, it's always contested spaces because of these other issues in that superficial way. So I do think one of the things that the communities can do in terms of leveraging, but holding accountability, you have the rights to all the meetings, you have the rights to all the documents, you have the right to actually get hold of those things. You have a right to actually participate and actually go into these council meetings and actually like vote out those things. Unfortunately, one of the ways that actually that the community has been able to do in various ways actually is organizing themselves and actually forming movements within, organizing your communities, organizing as a counterpower to some of these elements. It's actually a very useful element, but also to organize comes with actually understanding what the municipality does. There is certain leverages in the municipality that you can actually use that are there in the municipal act and are there in the Municipal System Act and the PMF and various other ways that actually you can leverage and part of it, but it's also informing, part of organizing. And I think this is my critique to the movement sometimes. Part of organizing is also becoming organic intellectuals. What is happening? It's reading outside. Also, there's a day-to-day, struggles, but also like that you actually face, but also there's also informing yourself how governance work, the state that controls you and what it actually means. And there are various other people that you can find resources on. And it's not easy sometimes, but I think it's a form that it can be used in various ways. But to do that, it needs people to inform themselves other than protesting and service delivery, because there's certain things the municipalities cannot do. Electricity. Some municipalities have license to supply electricity, some majority of them don't. What do you do there? How do you leverage power? Do you go to the municipality for housing? No, the power doesn't lie there per se. It lies elsewhere. And how do you actually juxtapose it? For sanitation, the power lies in the municipalities. So also it's using and manipulating the powers and the leverages in different ways of these institutions in order to actually get the service delivery. But I think also that needs also education and self-education in various ways as well, in participating in that. It's not easy, I understand that, but I think it's part of a step into that process.
Yeah, I mean, I want us to speak a bit more about that, about organizing. In the past few weeks, in the build-up to local government elections, we've been engaging community-based movements across the country, and there seems to be a number of positions that are coming from community-based movements. I think interesting positions and new positions this local government elections. In Makanda, for example, the Unemployed People's Movement has put several candidates forward. They've linked up with other community organizations to put candidates forward. Similarly, in Bonteheuwel and the Cape Flats, they've taken a vote them out approach and have put candidates forward. In a community in Northwest, they've resolved to take on basic services by themselves and sort of democratize the way things that are independent of local government. In Bishop Lavis in Cape Town on the Cape Flats, the community movement there that's organized and wants to build organization through street and block committees have decided to reject elections completely and are boycotting elections and are calling for what they call democracy from below. So there are all these different positions that we've been seeing over the past few weeks. But there is a common thread, and the common thread is that local government doesn't work because it's not participatory. Local government doesn't work because councillors, because other political representatives don't represent us, they don't listen to us, they don't understand us, and therefore we need alternatives. So all of these are ways, tactics, and strategies to achieve these alternatives. I see.
Can I chip in? Can I chip in that? Is it okay?
Okay. I just want to address. I see Mutsi. So Mutsi is based in Botshabelo in the Free State. He's part of the Botshabelo Unemployed Movement and the Crowd the Excluded, and they've put several candidates forward as well in Botshabelo. He's asking a question: what is the alternative to local municipalities in a socialist society? And I think this is the common question that's been asked. What is the alternative in the context of failing local government? Mosa, I'll start with you.
Okay, I mean, this has happened before, and I just want to question sort of like the independence. I think there's a space to do that. I mean, this is what happened with, I don't know if Trevor spoke about this, where the previous 10 years ago or so, the Operation Khanyisa movement did the independence in Soweto and actually won certain wards in Soweto. And they entered the municipality as independents. And immediately, like months into that process, the independent candidate who was representing OKM was turned into a DA member easily. It was a blow at that time because it was earlier on during the local election things. And the movement at that time, APF, Anti-Privatization Forum, and so on, didn't know how to deal with that crisis at that time. And I want to caution, because, the municipality, as much as it's about, and I'm speaking because I worked in it, and I want people to, I'm not focusing in it as an activist. I am in one level, but within, because actually when you actually go into this beast, not only has like rules of like regulations that are tiresome, but there are actually active, like a machinery of the DA, the machinery of the ANC that actually has sort of like established itself. In one level, maybe the EFF, but it's not actually quite strong, the EFF in some areas, actually. They get swept into this political machinery because of the dynamics that happens. So actually, I think comrades, as much as they should go independent, and we need more of those, some of the people to go independent into that, they have to be aware that easily, in terms of voting, in terms of the power relations, in terms of also depending which municipalities they go into, whether it's the DA one, which has other dynamics versus the ANC one, but actually by the end, this is machinery. They can be easily swept into those politics and actually find themselves actually far weaker as independent than actually joining either the ANC or the DA. So they actually have to start thinking strategically. What does it actually mean when you're actually inside that beast? What you will do, and how you actually subvert, and how do you actually gain power with that machinery in place? And I think it's a big thing, because you can't just say, as much as we want to say, when you go there, you will represent the people. Yeah, when you get there, you are bogged down with systems that are already in place, that are actually fractured, that are in, with different political dynamics that you have to contest with, and win through, not with different subversions as well. So it's not an easy answer into that. And how do you actually keep bringing inside the municipality and still be in touch with the community, and still keep the mobilization going? And those are difficult questions. I don't know if they've thought about those questions as well. So, and of course, earlier on, the first person I heard about boycotting the elections was Ronnie Castro back then. We thought he was crazy, with some other people. And it's like, how is this possible? But the more now as democracy moves, and maybe it is the best strategy. I don't know. Maybe we just need the 30%. It's already happening. By-election is already happening, that actually people are not participating in these local elections as much as historically. By-elections have been low attendance, but actually by far, so far historically, it's been the lowest attendance and participation in that. Maybe we should go that route. What would it look like, for example, to have like a moment of like Nigeria, for example, elections where, only like 26% of the population actually participate in like elections? What would it actually mean for these political parties? Will they change the ways? Maybe it's the power that we only have. I don't know. And I think I'm boycotting. I'm on that side this time. But I do think it's a question that also we have to think about it. What is the end result by boycotting? What is the end result by, having independence? Because it's not easy. Fixing the institutions and people are actually ingrained in it. It's not easy of just going there and you're gonna represent the people. That's a very, very naive like way of thinking about politics at local level.
Yeah. So the problem, as we've said consistently through this webinar and others, is like fundamentally the system and how electoral politics works. Prof. Stephen, same question. What are the alternatives? I see there's a question in the Q&A box as well. How does the left organize beyond political parties? Mutsi, I think, is asking a similar question. How do we build municipalities in a socialist society? So what are these alternatives?
Okay, sorry. The reason I'm laughing, I was laughing when Musa was talking, is I never reveal ever how I vote, but I'm going to break my rule once. I voted for the OKM in that election. Voting for a DA councillor. I've never forgotten it. So as soon as she started the chair, I thought, no, well, okay.
This is recorded, by the way. It's on Facebook. It's on Twitter.
No, I've confessed. I mean, even if it wasn't on Facebook and Twitter, there are more than enough people out there. Now, look, I think this is a hugely important question, and I want to be fair. It's something which I've written about recently, and it's something it's interested me in a long time. I think it's very important to understand that elections matter. I mean, I agree entirely that, I don't want to get involved in an argument, are the people who put up candidates right, or are the people who don't vote right, etc. I think there's a bigger question at stake here, which is, if you want to change the reality we have at the moment, where do elections fit into this reality? And I think that they're important in a particular way. I mean, just as an example, I was a part of a research study with colleagues around the world in a whole series of countries in the global south. And one of the topic of the research project was precisely looking at case studies in which citizens had changed their reality they faced in some way or another. And what we found was that in every one of those cases, where there were free elections, that helped, that mattered. But not in what Musa has called the naive way. I mean, I'm not arguing that you should go there and you go there and you put your cross in front of party X or whatever it is, and then they go and do all sorts of wonderful things on your behalf. We all know that doesn't happen anyway. But the fact that the people who take the decisions, and whether you decide you want to go your own route or not is your decision. But I don't believe that you can simply ignore that power. We need to change that power and not close our eyes and wish it will go away. That the more the people there who are in those positions taking those decisions have to worry about what people think, the stronger activism can be. So what we are trying to create, so it's not a case of saying, look, if you get 3 councillors, you'll be in a wonderful position. I think people need to think in their areas. What outcome would make our activism more effective? And it may differ from area to area. So instead of taking this kind of, stand which has got nothing to do with the concrete realities in which we sit, look at the strategic opportunities. Now, let me tell you something that's been on my mind for 5 years now. I happen to be on the board of an NGO, in which people, in which our job is to assist people to organize locally, etc. And after the 2016, about a couple of weeks after the 2016 local election, I was invited to speak to a group to a fairly large group of the activists we were working with. And what I said to them then, because I was thinking of Joburg and Tshwane, which is where, obviously we were situated at the time. I said, we've got a great opportunity here, because in both of those municipalities, there's no majority government. The DA formed the government in those municipalities with something like 30% of the vote. And the reason I thought that was an opportunity is that if you're well organized, if you've got a solid base among people in that area, if you've got a clear vision of what it is you try to achieve in the city, then you're in a very strong position, because if the people who are governing don't like what you have to say, you can start engaging with the others. And my influence here, I'm influenced again here by Chatterjee, because Chatterjee in one of his books describes the way in which activists in slums in Calcutta operate. And what they do is they go to the political parties, and they never endorse any of the political parties or support any of the political parties. But they're perfectly well aware that if they can convince those political parties that they're speaking for people, then those political parties are probably going to do what they say, not because these activists have offered them any votes or anything, but because they think that by doing what they say, they'll get people to vote for them, etc. And if you're in a situation in which you don't have to go and persuade, some governing party which thinks it can do what it likes, you're in a much stronger position. And nobody tried to do that. Just to make it even more concrete, one of the questions which were asked during the discussion is, Joburg before 2016 had developed this Corridors of Freedom project, which had limitations, etc., but did take us forward, because one of what it was really addressing is how did you open up land far nearer where there were economic opportunities for people to live. So instead of people living in these dreadfully far areas where you have to drive by bus for ages to get anywhere near where you can find some opportunity to put bread on the table for your family, you could actually live next to where those opportunities were, so that you could get out of bed in the morning and just go and walk there. And the activist said, well, are we, now that the power's changed in the municipality, are we going to have those corridors of freedom? Because we think that there's something that can be built on there. And my answer was, that depends on you. Because if you, as I've said before, if you organize and you strategize, you can create a situation in which you will have those corridors of freedom. Because in fact, whatever the limits of electoral politics, the actual makeup of the council, the majority of parties in the council had to pretend at least to worry about what the majority of people in the area think. So I think it's very much a strategic, it's a case of saying, and remembering that the core of this, and I hope that's been clear for what I've been saying, the core of this is strong organization and a clear vision of where you want to go. Because without that, you are wasting your time. The idea that if you don't have strong organization and you win 2 council seats or whatever it is, that you would change absolutely anything in the lives of the people who hopefully you're representing is just unrealistic. But what I am saying is that if that strong organization exists, then I think that it's a strategic mistake not to take electoral politics seriously. And taking electoral politics seriously doesn't mean I'm telling you all to go out and vote even. I'm just saying that if you recognize that electoral politics forces people in that situation to do things which they would otherwise not like to do. Just get back to what I said much earlier on. Even if the only reason the councillor is there is because the difference is between being middle class and poor, at the moment the councillor believes that if they want to be middle class, they have to do what the party bosses say. With strong organization, you create a situation where they might have to start thinking, well, if I want to stay in the middle class, I'm actually going to have to do what the people who live in this area want me to do. And that changes the whole equation. So I'm really appealing for a strategic approach on this issue. Look, as far as visions for the future is concerned, and what would local government look like in a socialist society, I mean, that's a bit of a problem because it takes us into a whole debate about what is a socialist society, what isn't a socialist society. But one thing I believe very strongly is that our problem at the moment, and I think I said that at the beginning, whether you're working for some idea of socialism, whatever kind of alternative you're working for, if we agree that what we want is a society in which there is equality, in which there is justice for everybody, I don't think the problem is the structures. I don't think the problem is that we don't have direct democracy, because there's been a lot of research done to suggest that if you have an unequal society, direct democracy turns out to just empower the powerful anyway. That the powerful just use direct democracy to be powerful instead of using indirect democracy to be powerful. So I think what is wrong at the local level at the moment is that the majority of people at the local level are not organized enough to be able to stand up to power holders. And that's the simple reality that I think needs to be worked at and needs to be changed. And I don't think it's about the structure of local government. I think it's about those power realities in the areas where we have local government.
Okay, we're out of time, so I'll give us 3 minutes. Dr. Moosa, just over a week left for local government elections. Final comments in 1 minute.
I mean, as Stephen has said, organizing is important. Understanding what the municipality does, it's important as you organize. However, there's an element of myself that actually, what we've seen with the coalition government, that actually doesn't work. I mean, the political parties have helped and halted service delivery, because the debates, it's actually factional fighting within and changing different mayors in different ways. I mean, Mogale City, right? There's no service delivery at all, primarily because there's internal fighting within these parties, the EFF, ANC, and the DA, in terms of those things. However, it depends on the community to organize themselves. But organizing, it's fighting the bread and butter issues, but also understanding the system and actually understanding how you can leverage power in the municipalities. And if you don't understand those things, I think we are in trouble. That's what I want to say.
Stephen, 1 minute. How do we build strong organization?
Yeah, well, how we build strong organization is a separate. To me, it's about building strong organization is about understanding where people are and working on that. And look, people may know this. I mean, I developed a lot of my ideas on organization from being in the trade union movement and trying to understand what it works. And I think the most important lesson, because people who go out and organize are generally people who quite rightly do want a different kind of society, is start with where people are. If people feel that they're powerless, if they can change small things in their lives, then they start realizing that they actually have power. So the workers' movement didn't start with people saying we want a new society. The workers' movement around the world literally started with people saying we want an 8-hour day. And when they won that 8-hour day, they started saying, well, hang on, if we can win an 8-hour day, we can win other things as well. And I can show you through academic studies, through research studies, that people in this country who were members of the trade union movement during the period in which it was a strong movement have very different attitudes to people who weren't, because they were organized. I think that's crucial. And just one final comment. I agree with Moosa entirely. I mean, when I was talking about opportunities, coalition governments are not great for citizens. But I was talking about a situation in which you had, as we had in Joburg, Tshwane, and a lot of other places in which there was no coalition, there was no majority. But remember, part of the problem there is that, you know, if you have strong organization, they fight among themselves because they will do so until citizens force them to listen, is the point they're making. And the question we've got to ask ourselves is, A, how do you organize to force them to listen? But also strategically, how do you use voting or not voting to ensure that they're most likely to listen?
Thank you, Professor Stephen and Dr. Musa. I think that was very insightful, useful discussion. And that ends our 5-part webinar series on the local government crisis. We will continue the conversation. We'll have follow-ups following the local government elections. We'll also keep in touch with the two of you. Hopefully we can pick up some of the questions that we weren't able to address. I have a lot of notes. So hopefully we can do that following local government elections on the 1st of November. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to Chisimani Center for Activist Education, My Vote Counts. Thank you to the attendees. Some of you attended all 5 webinars. We'll send the recordings by email, the links to the recordings, and continue organizing, continue building, and good luck to those comrades who are contesting power and taking the route of voting parties out. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you, and yeah.